computer. All right, so now we're recording, and I'll send you guys a link to all this here afterwards. So I'm going to share my screen, and then let's go over into Lightroom. So let's go ahead and start with you, Brian. One of the things that I like to do at the beginning of these is I like to just kind of look at the images, you know, at a thumbnail view, because a lot of times you'll start to see like repeating patterns or, a theme throughout. And looking at these, man, I love the atmosphere that you have, especially in these. And then in these two that you have water, you're very intentional about your shutter speed choice. So big time props on all of that. Also, I just love the light in this one here with the
Yeah,
tree.
it's a special
Um,
morning.
yeah. So like great moments, great atmosphere, intentional. Like I can tell that you're working on intention. You're trying to be intentional with your choices that you're making. Um, when I look at these at kind of a thumbnail view, I usually try to pick favorites just because sometimes when you're looking from a wider view, something will catch your eye. I like the graphic nature of the first image, but I absolutely love the light and atmosphere of the second. So I think I'm kind of gravitating towards these two. Could be just because, this one is so colorful. But I
Mhm.
like the graphic, more abstract nature of this cliff face as well. So jumping into this one, let's do this. Like I said, I love the long shutter speed choice. This must have been multi-minute, right?
Yeah, I can look and tell
I
you.
think. See if it gives me. Oh, it's 120 seconds. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
2 minutes. Yeah, I love the long shutter speed choice. I think like my first reaction to it is that because we have so much bright in the water, it might feel just a tiny bit more natural if we just darken it down just the tiniest bit. And
Oh
I'm
yeah.
I'm talking not much. And the reason for that is by darkening it down, it allows the rock and the grass or moss, I guess that's grass on the rock face, to be a little bit more vibrant and saturated, which
Yeah.
makes it contrast even more with the water, I think. And literally, like it's not even a stop that I darkened it down, but if you look at the difference, like
Yeah.
this starts feeling pretty bright and washed out. But honestly, that is just about my only feedback, which is a good thing. I like that. I can tell you did some kind of either negative dehaze or Orton effect or something like that. I just love the dreaminess around these edges. That's probably my favorite part is like where the waves were lapping up and it creates this beautiful dreaminess. But I love the
Yeah,
graphic nature of it.
yeah, the waves, this is Ireland, and
Okay.
the what I found when I was shooting there, and it took me like a week to learn this, is the water is so like intense that it just gets so white. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it just gets, you get these like, it looks like just somebody took a white paintbrush when you, so
Yeah.
it was really kind of tricky. And I tried to wait till it was way calm. I was standing on that ledge for like 40 minutes. And
And
then it
like you,
was
you
calm and I'm
probably
like, boom.
had some other images, something like this, where it's a little bit more abstract because
Yeah,
one of the, when you're doing these kind of abstracty photos, sometimes it's nice to not have too much of an anchor. So because this is a cliffside, it's obviously continuing down throughout the bottom of the frame, which in some ways kind of leads the eye out of the frame because
yeah,
this image, like the theme of it, it's very much the theme is contrasting textures. So you have
mhm,
like no texture in water and then all this beautiful texture in rock. And so the eye is drawn to those contrasts and textures. And because we have so much texture here, it kind of escapes out the frame. Sometimes, like something like this, where it's just an island of texture, the eye stays contained within the frame because all of
yeah.
it's all out here. So like you probably took this photo, I'm guessing as well, because how could you not? Well, I mean, I'm
Well,
assuming.
yeah, don't
Don't assume
don't
too much.
assume.
Don't go there. Okay.
It's
But
just
this is like when you're confronted with something like this, where you're kind of going a little bit more like, abstract or small scene, and you got this
yeah.
long, when you get these little islands of texture, this could work as well.
Yeah,
That's all I was wanting to point out.
well, I like this concept because I didn't even really that's really good because I didn't really see it as like a clash of textures. And so that's
Right.
really kind of opened my eyes a bit. I saw it more as like pointing out to the sea. I saw the triangle, like,
Okay. Yeah. The
and
shape of it. Hmm.
but it didn't even occur to me that the texture, like, now I see it like soft moss, like rocks
Yeah.
that could slice you up and kill you.
Yeah,
Uh, you
exactly.
know,
That's what I love about these rocks is it's so much texture and so jagged.
yeah, with a little
R-
flower. I mean, now I'm looking at this. I should have taken my telephoto out because, like, right there, like,
yeah.
sharp rock, pretty flower on top, right?
Yeah.
Like, got the
Exactly.
contrast.
You don't
Yeah, I didn't
notice.
even see that. Yeah,
Sometimes a person doesn't notice that stuff until you zoom in on an image and you're like, oh man, I love that. Good, by the way,
yeah,
good job on doing this long exposure and keeping it so sharp. It's not easy to do, especially in
yeah.
Ireland where it's windy.
It was a kind of calm day. Well,
Yeah.
calm for Ireland, I guess.
Yeah.
But I also did some software stuff on this. I'm pretty sure this went through either DxO or
Sure.
something, just to like deal with it because there
Th-
certainly was some camera shake. That moss you're seeing there is what I was standing on the top, which
yeah.
is
That
like,
I was thinking like it's hard to get a nice stable base when you're
yeah,
shooting this stuff too. But this is the kind of thing where like the more you zoom in, kind of the better it gets, like
yeah,
even something like this, I love the kind of play on the grass,
oh
rock,
yeah,
and then water.
yeah,
There's many compositions just in this one composition. So
yeah,
that might be my feedback is like processing is nice, the color and white balance choice is nice. It was a little bright, and by darkening it down, it takes
makes
on
a
a bit
huge
more
difference.
vibrance. But I
Yeah,
think that maybe when you're shooting something like this in the future, pick out some of these smaller little parts of the scene and shoot them as well. That would be the lesson in there, I think.
all right, I'm gonna call Peter Gordon. I have to go back now
Yeah,
because I have
right.
no idea where this place was.
Peter and I are actually going to team up on an Ireland workshop too. So
Oh, really?
yeah,
Well, you
and
could.
I'm bringing him to Oregon with
Oh,
all his
cool.
Irish
Yeah,
lads, his Irish lambs.
he's just so you people that don't know, you go into the back of his van and he calls you lambs the whole trip. He's like, "How are my lambs doing?"
That
And at
he
first, it
got
kind
that
of
from
bugs you a little
Thor.
bit, but by the end of the trip, it's kind of adorable, and you're like, "Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm your lamb."
that he got that from Thor, who is our mutual friend in Iceland, and he always refers to all the participants as the little lamb. So he's like,
Yeah.
Nick, I'm going to go round up the little lambs, and we're going to we're going to take them to slaughter. All right, so this image, absolutely beautiful light, beautiful color. Like this is really nice, and I'm taking it this is like in Smokies. Is that
This
right?
is in the Adirondacks, actually, in New
Oh, okay.
York. This
Wow.
past October. Yeah,
So what makes this so beautiful, obviously, is this light, but I love that you kept the light source out of frame because that allows, everything to be a little bit more side lit and it gets that beautiful atmosphere coming in from the side. There's a couple things that like create tension here though. So
yeah.
what creates tension to me is that we have so little sky up here. Let me check and see if this, no, not a crop. So we have so little sky and it's what I consider an awkward amount of sky. So
Yeah,
obviously it would have been nice if you could eliminate sky altogether, but you couldn't in this case because of how low the horizon comes.
yeah.
So you made a good
I
choice
have
by,
more sky. I got more sky if I need
okay.
it. Like yeah. This,
Okay. So I would say go ahead and include a bit more sky.
yeah,
And a couple other little things is that, you have this little tree that's just right here. And finding the right place to crop is always like, it's always a struggle, right? But I think
Yeah.
just bringing it in just the tiniest bit to eliminate just those limbs, you wouldn't you wouldn't lose any of the feeling, but you would lose some of the distraction, right?
Yep.
The other thing is like when you're on a ledge and you're shooting trees that grow vertically, like you see how this tree is tilted. It's one
Yeah.
of it's one of the things that like not most non-photographers aren't going to notice stuff like that, but photographers tend to. So one of the things that you can play with, especially if you shot it just a little bit wider, is you can go into the transform section, go into the vertical slider and start playing with that and see if you can make your trees stand up again. So like
Oh, wow.
if I can
Yeah.
constrain the crop, you can make the tree vertical. But you can see that it starts cropping in on the image. So like you need a little extra breathing room in order to do that. So that would be my feedback is when you're shooting like either tilted way down or tilted way up and you have trees where, you know, people like it's a feeling that like trees should grow straight up. They don't always, but most of the time they do. If you can just fix some of that distortion, you know, you could fix it
Yeah.
entirely if you wanted to, if you had enough space, which, you know, you're not always going to have, but you can see how now that tree is pretty much straight up and down. And so when we look at that, it makes it feel like you're shooting level with it and it corrects all that distortion. But you'd have to have some extra breathing room to be able to not, you know, crop out the important bits.
Yeah.
So that would be something to think about when you have one of my biggest um faults like when I'm shooting is that I shoot too tight, meaning like I zoom in on things a little bit
Mm.
too much. And one of the things I've really had to correct with myself is that I need to shoot a little bit looser. That way, if I have to do any of these kinds of things, I've got that breathing room that I need. Or maybe there's a distraction that I didn't notice in the field. I can crop it out and not destroy my composition. If you had shot it like this, you know, like you can't crop much at all, and then you're starting to lose peaks and things. So
Yeah.
so shooting just a little bit looser in the field is useful. And like if you've got other frames where you did include more sky, that's perfect.
Yeah. I'm
But
looking. I have other frames of more sky, but not with the light. So
okay.
that gets a bit tricky. So
But you know, a
I could
sky
do
like
that
this,
expand the canvas thing, couldn't I? Like
exactly.
just yeah.
A sky like this, like is easy to just kind of expand, you know, because there's not like tons of texture or anything in it. So you could take it into Photoshop, expand the canvas, and then just do some generate fill and like create a little bit of extra sky. But what you're not going to be able to create is like, you know, the areas in the mountains will be harder to just manufacture, you know? So this is
Yeah.
lesson number 2 is maybe just shoot just the tiniest bit looser, especially during those really important moments of light or whatever. Like one of the places that it happens to me is like I'll be photographing a wave and then the wave splashes just out of frame and the frame is ruined because I was shooting too tight. Like
Yeah.
stuff happens to me all the time. But
Hmm.
your handling of contrast and saturation and everything is really, really nice in this image. Like the processing
Thank
is
you.
really good.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yep.
Thank you. And
Okay.
you know, I'm carrying your last lesson forward. So if you go back, I'm looking at that tree in the right,
Yeah.
and there's some really cool stuff in there that a telephoto would have
Yeah.
been cool with.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. When you
Like,
start zooming in on stuff, you start seeing all kinds of stuff.
I know. So the other lesson of like, because I tried to get to that tree, but like it's literally just like a straight drop,
Yeah.
and I should have just put the telephoto on and been because there's some cool stuff back there too with light, with like,
Yep. Yeah. It's beautiful.
yeah,
All right.
cool. Thank
So
you.
into the next image. Love the atmosphere here. That's that uh steam or fog coming off of the water is beautiful. And I love the kind of dreamy etherealness of it. I'm assuming that you kind of enhance that a little bit with an Orton effect.
I did, yeah, I did. I did it with a Nick effect, Nick
Okay.
Tools
Gotcha.
effect.
Yep.
That has a very similar to Orton.
Yep.
Is that a
Um,
Photoshop tool, the Orton?
So the Orton effect is it's like a technique where it's essentially like a soft focus effect, kind of like if you envision the 90s glamour portraits where, you know, it had that that soft focus effect. It's like that on a landscape image where you can kind of enhance the atmosphere of a scene. So it kind of mellows out those sharp details. It's something that I do like in every image that I edit. So looking at this, this isn't one that I've really looked at a lot yet, so I'm kind of absorbing it for the first time. I'm noticing like how bright and neutral the steam is, and I don't think that's a bad thing, but I do think that I want to see what. Oh, I see. You kind of mellowed out some of the magenta tone there. I'm curious, white balance wise, if we could get just a little bit more color separation, because what strikes me is just how white this this is, and my gut reaction is that I'd like to see this just a tiny bit colder, but then warm up some of the tones in the trees. That way you get that color separation. So that's gut reaction number one, is I'd like to see a little bit more color separation, because even though you're in the shade, everything is kind of a warm tint, which is not a bad thing with fall color for sure. But I'd just like to have a little bit of cold tone to kind of balance with it. So, you know, something that you might think about is just trying to keep this, like if we look at just the water area, if we just cool it down just to like this, you know, where it's a little bit colder than neutral. Granted, it sucks all the life out of the trees, but then we can have, you know, even if we just like took a linear gradient filter with a warmer color temperature and then just drug it down and brought that life back, then we start having that, you know, that warm to cold color contrast. And I think that, you know, it's just something that's kind of nice in an image like that to maintain that color separation. So if I go back to how it came in,
it's kind of like that white is just a wall. It just kind of stops.
Exactly. And it's quite bright, so it catches the eye quite a bit. Did you brighten that, I'm guessing?
I don't know. Like I don't always remember what I did.
Right. To me, it feels like maybe it's over brightened just a little bit, because the eye really struggles to leave it, even though you have all these nice
if I can reset
foliages back here. So one of the things that
I would actually darkened it, actually.
Really? Okay. Well, maybe
but that might be because I shot it really bright. So you know what I mean? I might have just
gotcha.
I might have just shot it all the way to the right instead of backing it off a bit.
And something else that I would be tempted to do is to just do a little bit of dodging in some of the trees back here and give it a little bit of dimension. Because, you know, you have these yellows that would be really easy to add a little brightness to. You have like the edges of these pine trees that you could add just a little bit of highlight to, and just give it a little bit of eye-catching highlight back here. That way it can compete with this line of white here, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that'd be my feedback on this one. And maybe
I have a hard time with the trees because it feels like I always overdo them, you know. It's just really
well, and that's the Bennett, like, for example, let's just do it real quick. Let's say I open this up inside of Photoshop, and let's say let's say we're here inside of Photoshop. So the way that I prefer to do this, how many people are Photoshop editors in this? Like, I guess I can't see you, but
just beginning.
Okay.
So yeah, a little bit.
So the way that I like to dodge and burn is called guided dodging and burning, where I'll make a selection of bright tones and then I'll paint through that selection. That way it only allows my paint to go into the bright areas. And I do that with TK Actions, which is Tony Kuiper's actions. And there's, you know, you can go really deep into the weeds. We could spend this whole damn time talking about it. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole too much, but just the way that I prefer to do something like this is, let's say I create what is a dodge burn layer for me, which is a new layer. And in this case, I'm going to use overlay as my blend mode. So I've got a blank layer with the blend mode changed to overlay. And then I'll grab a lights 1 or a lights 2 luminosity mask. And you can see when I cycle through these, they get more and more contrasty, but I can also base them off of color. So let's say I was wanting to emphasize the yellows back there. If I started off with a yellow channel luminosity mask, it kind of singles those out a little better. And then right here is this button. And this allows me to use the color channel picker, or it's basically a black and white thing, but it gives me all these color channel sliders. And I can remove blue, but I can add yellow to it. And you see how when I do that, it makes a really nice selection, or it selects those foliages more. So I can do something like that. Remove blue, remove magenta, increase yellows. And then I can create a selection of it with this button. And so now I've got a selection of bright yellows. And if I grab a paintbrush and go to like 20% opacity and then zoom in on those areas, I can sample the color that I want to paint with. And then just do a few little clicks, and it's going to limit my paint to those areas. So like when I come to a tree of a slightly different shade, I change the color of my brush. That way it's just adding just a little bit of extra highlight punch to those. And I'm painting with the color that's already there. I can do the same with reds, although I didn't select red very much in my selection, but we can just add a little kick there. And what we're doing is we're just helping the eye get back to these places. I can select yellows again, then just zoom in. And so this is how I do a lot of my dodging and burning. That way, you know, I'm using something to guide me. So it's the paint isn't just going everywhere willy-nilly. And so when I zoom out here, you can see we've added just these little splashes of color. And if I've overdone them,
difference.
which I always do, like I always overdo everything because I'm not very tasteful, I can just back off the opacity. And I can fade that in and out to where it is tasteful. And if you do this kind of stuff for a while, like you could really draw the eye to where you're wanting to go. So you could also do it on these beautiful tree trunks. I think these birch trees would be awesome to add just a little bit of highlight kick back there. And what's nice is it starts looking very three-dimensional because you're adding dimension. You're bringing some of those highlights out from the background. So I think that might be something to try in an image like this.
Cool. Yeah, it just makes such a difference. I could see
That's
it.
awesome.
Yeah, and
Because I think mine are just too global when I do it. It's just
Right.
too, you know what I mean? Like everything's coming up.
Yeah, and global is a nice way to keep things very tasteful, because sometimes when you go really local, you make some bad decisions in there with the good decisions, and like sometimes it comes away looking like a cartoon. But you know, the real key, the real trick is to just, you know, if you've overdone something, you save your layers and you come back to it and you look at it and you're like, oh my God, what was I smoking? And so you just back off the opacity of some of those layers that you overdid, and then, oh, suddenly it's tasteful. But, you know, you're sneaking up on a result. Okay, next image. I love the shutter speed choice here. This was really, really good. I love the shutter speed choice. It looks like you did some kind of mid-tone contrast to kind of bring that out a little bit. Am I right there?
Yep. Yeah. Spent a lot of time on the tone curve. I think probably in the tone curve a bit.
This is also another one where like you got that fall color in the background, and yet you didn't really do a lot with saturation here. And I think
nothing.
Yeah. I think you could probably bring the eye back there a lot more, maybe just with a tiny bit warmer color temperature. So you see the difference there, that from here to where it was. But also, like, this is another good opportunity for color separation, because back here it would look beautiful with kind of a warmer color temperature or some of those warm tones. But in this water, it'd look a little cleaner if it was just slightly colder. So, just something as simple as you could grab a linear gradient tool, drag it up like that, and then just cool down the color temperature just the tiniest bit.
Yeah.
And so this keeps the water nice and clean. And the psychology of it is the eye is always going to be drawn to warmth because that's just how it works. So by warming it up just a bit more, and maybe we could add a touch more saturation, now it starts taking on this, cold, clean water with warm fall foliage background. The eye kind of goes back through the frame. But what I like so much about this frame is, like, obviously the swirls in the water are awesome. And I like that you were really intentional about your shutter speed. The part that is a little bit distracting is just that sliver of sky. And so when
Yeah.
I opened this earlier, I was like, oh, and then I realized that, this is a smaller portion of a bigger scene. So I would either include more sky like that, or try to eliminate it altogether, which is tough in this particular scenario to eliminate it. It's one of those where you want to have like a comfortable amount of sky, and it's hard when the sky is that bright, but that's
Yeah.
one
There's
of the,
nothing happening.
yeah.
Yeah.
But if you recovered it, like, so this is all just off the rough file. If you would have bracketed, and that way we could really like recover those highlights. If I bring it down, they're just not there.
I'm almost certain I have a bracket of that sky.
If you could just
Um,
exposure blend in that sky, but it's going to be challenging with those limbs and leaves and stuff. That's always a hard thing to exposure blend.
yeah. I also have a much wider. Also shot it the other way. Now that I'm
Like
looking.
horizontally.
Yeah, which creates a lot more water,
Yeah.
and the sky's irrelevant after that because you get that like straight line across. Like I have twice as much foreground in that picture.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. One of my little tricks that I'll do sometimes, and this is tricksy, is, let's say if I was open in Photoshop, right? I would create let's see, in order to do this, you'll need to have like a merge visible layer, so pixel layer. So I'm just gonna decrease the opacity of this. So a merge visible layer is Control Shift Alt E or Command Option Shift E on a Mac. Let me decrease the opacity of this. And it gives me this layer here. Can you guys see that? This top layer? And it's just the current state of the photo on its own pixel layer. And so let's say that we wanted to have the top of our frame somewhere like here, but we wanted to eliminate that bit of sky. One of the things that you can do is, if we just stretched up that top bit, we could extend it to where it exits the frame a bit. So you could grab rectangular marquee tool, select this top, where you want to start stretching, something like this, hit Control or Command T for transform. And then you can just hold down Shift and stretch it. And so, like, if you're just trying to get things to fill up the top portion of the frame, we'll stretch this guy's head a little bit. You could do something like this, where it's, there's limits to it, obviously, but now we can eliminate that sky without too crazy of a stretching effect.
Great. Yeah. Yeah.
And so the reason I always like to try to eliminate sky when you can is because those highlights compete with the highlights of the real story. And the real story, I think in this case, is like the foam swirls and bubbles and the highlights in the water. So that's an option. I don't know that this is like the best use case for that option, but it's just something to point out.
What do you think about? I struggle a bit with the big white blob in the middle. Like
I would
it's got a
recover it.
reflection in it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I would recover it. So, you know, as soon as we start recovering those highlights, the problem is you got to be local about it. So you could grab like
Yeah.
a radial filter, a radial gradient filter, maybe not that big, and then just recover those highlights a bit. That way the eye can notice some of the
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
ones.
It's so much better. Yeah.
But that would be my biggest critique with this one is try to maintain, like, you increase the saturation a bit so those background fall foliages actually are noticeable and stand out, and, you know, cool down the foreground. That way you have this gradient of cold to warm, and it runs the eye through the frame. You know, it gets the eye to the background, which is usually the goal in most images. But I love the shutter speed choice. So
I got to
next
get rid of
image.
the photographer that's in there too. Like
Yeah.
I just noticed I haven't done that yet.
Yeah.
Dude hanging out there. That'll be easy.
Yeah.
The next one is a focus stack. That's the only thing I've done to it is the stack.
Gotcha.
Otherwise I haven't touched this at all because I'm struggling with it.
Telephoto focus stacks are challenging too, because there's so much lens breathing that a lot of times you end up with halos around stuff. But the focus stack part of it came out pretty good. It's nice and sharp throughout. So
Thanks.
this is one of those interesting, like, it's a challenging composition because you have this strong leading line, right?
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily symmetrical all the way across, even though it's a story about symmetry. You know, it's very much a story about symmetry because you have these repeating lines on both sides of the path, and, you know, and that kind of vanishing point back here. Sometimes these kinds of compositions, even though like it has all these vertical lines, sometimes it's nice to have almost more of a panoramic aspect ratio, because it puts all the focus on just how many of those lines there are, and you don't notice things like empty areas of the composition. So something to try maybe would be just to bring it up a little bit and eliminate some of this empty space, and it starts filling the frame more with those vertical lines. You can even take it pretty far, and
I think so.
and then the eye doesn't notice the empty space at all. It's noticing all those vertical lines. This is also one of those that it becomes really easy for it to just be a wash of warm tones because everything is warm. You know, you got warm grasses, warm foliage, and then fairly neutral trunks. And so what I would maybe try to do is try to find a white balance that's a little bit colder, but then try to work that warmth back into the foliage. So like almost kind of a split toning effect. So like if we start a little bit more neutral and get those tree trunks really neutral, that way the shadow side has some cold tones. And then you can go in and maybe like go into your color channels or your color mixer, what they call it now. Go in here and just go into the hue saturation area and warm up the greens, warm up the yellows, and then work some of that warmth back in and add a bit of saturation. Then you can kind of start getting that split tony, you know, cold color temperature effect. I really like it when you have color contrast and color separation, and sometimes you can work a little bit of cold tones into the deeper shadows as well. So if we just went to the color grading here, this isn't how I would do it. I would do it through luminosity mask, but what you could do is just into your shadows, just work in some colder tones, something like that. Just so you can kind of maintain warmth in the foliage, but work some cold tones into the shadows. Let's go back to how it's supposed to be though. There we go. So this is where it started. But I think that the biggest thing would be this kind of crop, because I think
I was so focused on getting the whole tree that I kind of missed the point, which was just the repeating lines.
Yeah,
the individual trees really don't matter when you look at it that way.
Right. And I feel like every composition kind of has its theme, and this theme is the repeating vertical lines. That is the theme of this image, and that's kind of the graphical theme.
Mm.
You know, if you were to, you know, just take a blank piece of paper and make a sketch of what this image is, it's basically like vertical squiggle, vertical squiggle, like it's all those vertical lines. And
Yeah.
by eliminating the part that doesn't have those vertical lines, which is this, it puts the focus back on why you took the photo, which is like, you know, vertical lines and then something, you know, the path leading through it. So yeah, I think my ramble is done. Beautiful images. And I feel like your processing
thank
has
you.
gotten a lot better lately. Just judging from,
Yeah, I'm more intentional. I'm just
Yep.
like, if I'm gonna spend time on it's not about 10 photos, it's like one, and I'm careful, and I come back and I try whacked out stuff, and I'm like, what are you thinking? And I reset it.
but that's important. That's an
Um,
important part of the growing process, is like you got to push it too far. And then you're like, oh, okay, well, we'll dial this one back a
Yeah.
little bit. That's
But
good.
what's interesting is like, I don't think, like, when none of these pictures, when I was processing them, I didn't think what was the theme.
Yeah.
I thought a little more technical. So that's a really good, like, that's pretty eye-opening. Like, I
Yeah.
thought more
Like when you,
technical, like,
especially like
yeah.
when you look at images like this next to each other, like every image has a theme, you know, have beautiful color and a lone tree with light hitting it. It's very much a story about color. This one's very much about color. This one's very much about graphic shapes and
Contrast,
contrasting
yeah.
textures. This is very much a story about color and atmosphere. And this is very much a graphical story about vertical lines. And every time you have those stories, you're trying to eliminate parts of the scene, or eliminate things that the eye is noticing that are not part of that story. And so you're downplaying the parts that aren't helping the story, but you're trying to emphasize the parts of that story that are important. Like, you know, in this scene, it's very much a story about you got beautiful fall foliage in background and all this cool swirling action in the foam. And so eliminating parts of the story, like this guy, probably not part of the story. So, you know, eliminating parts of the story that aren't part of it, you know. Good images, man.
Great work, Brian. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
All right. So
This
Dan,
is
are
so
you ready?
helpful. Yeah. Eye-opening. Thanks.
Sure, ready. Yeah. After that.
All right. Let's look at them as a whole. Really, really beautiful processing. That's one of the things I notice, is that there's no super glaring problems with processing, and good compositions. There's beautiful, obviously you hike.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think these images match too, in the way that they're, I don't know, like tonally and contrast wise, you're consistent, if that makes sense. You know, you don't have a really dark image, really bright image, or like there's a consistency throughout. I really like that. Yeah. Looking at these, obviously, I love the shutter speed choice for your Spirit Falls image. That's perfect shutter speed, especially for this foreground water. I really like that foreground water and that texture. I love how you have a nice contrast, and yet you have nice open shadows. So sometimes contrast can really get away from a person and the shadows tend to get blocked up, but that's not the case in all of these images. I noticed it in this Badlands one as well. I like how open the shadows are and you can really see into the shadows, but it's still got a nice amount of texture. And yeah, processing as a whole is really, really strong, and compositions are strong as well. So let's start with the panorama. So first thing that I notice when I look at the panorama is, obviously it's beautiful light, beautiful scene. I am noticing the horizon line, the way it's bent.
Yeah.
And
I'm
really,
noticing that now for the first time.
yep. The only way to fix that is to go into Photoshop and to just start bending it. So you
Yep.
got to go in and kind of bend this part up and then bend this part down. Sometimes, and I'm guessing that you just didn't have enough overlap between your images. So some of that wide angle distortion uh, was showing up. Were these shot in vertical orientation, like with your camera?
I don't recall because this is 2 years ago. I've
Gotcha.
got several images. I think I just need to go back and start from scratch on this one. I mean, I honestly didn't notice that until you just zoomed in on it here. It's as obvious as the nose on my face, even the water, the line through the water. Yeah.
Yeah, right there.
Sure.
And sometimes, like especially with panoramas, you're looking at the wide scenes so much that some of the little things can go unnoticed. Like
Yes.
quality of the stitch. So, are you stitching these inside of Lightroom?
Yes.
Yeah. Lightroom really doesn't give you many options to fix it when it goes wrong. It either works or it doesn't, and people are just like, cool, I'm good with that. But I one of the other programs that can often save an image that won't stitch is called PT GUI. I don't know if you're
Okay.
familiar with that, but
No.
PT GUI is a panorama processing plugin, or not plugin. It's a program, but all it does is panorama stitching, and you can actually tell it, give it control points, and be like, this is the same as this in this image, and like give it all these control points, and the success rate just goes through the roof. So if you find that you're not able to stitch this in Lightroom or Photoshop, PT GUI will be able to stitch it.
Got it.
So that's my first reaction, is that horizon line has to be fixed.
Yeah, that's bad.
The other thing is, in this image, it's got a very, so compositionally, sometimes composition is very difficult in panoramas, and it just kind of looks like you're including everything in this particular case, and there's not like that vanishing point feel. Part of that is because the background here just kind of, it's not quite centered, it's not quite perfectly centered, but it's not off to the side either. And I think that we could fix a couple of compositional problems, the other one being the tree intruding on the edge of the
Yeah.
frame.
Yeah.
We could fix a couple of those with just a little bit of a crop. So just bringing it in maybe to here, or even maybe a bit more aggressive, something like that. And then bring this up here. And now it's got a bit more of a cascading into the distance feel, because if you're going to have something centered, it needs to be 100% centered. Otherwise, every OCD person that looks at the image is going to have their eye twitching. So, so you have to always cater to the OCDs among us. So just trying to either have this on a third, which would, this vanishing point in the distance where the peaks meet, try to have this little purposely off center or purposely perfectly centered, but don't have it almost centered, because then eyes start to twitch.
Got it.
Also, when you have blue haze in the background, either neutralizing it or just working with a slightly warmer color temperature to where it's, the blue haze is there, but sometimes just neutralizing that haze a little bit can make it feel more real. Like sometimes blue haze is more, especially in photos where we're adding saturation and stuff, that blue haze can kind of get away from you. So if you like the global, white balance, one of the things that I'll do is with a hue saturation layer in photo. Are you a Photoshop editor?
To a degree, yes.
Okay. So just, with a hue saturation layer, desaturating the blue channel a little bit, and then just painting that into those distant mountains that get too hazy, can neutralize some of that haze, and it actually makes it feel more real. Because one of the problems we run into is when we add vibrance and saturation in our photos, that blue haze gets unnaturally saturated. because blues are always the first thing to get oversaturated, in my opinion. So either starting with a slightly warmer color temperature, but not too much, because it kind of ruins some of the other areas of the photo. But you could go a little bit warmer with color temperature and then just neutralize some of that haze. And I think that would be nice as well. But I do like the textures in the foreground. I'd almost like to have just a little bit more of that as a nice placeholder, because
I would too.
you see this one line here. I'd love for that to be not unbroken. I'd love to see that one crack in the rock there unbroken. I think that would be pretty cool.
Yeah.
But I like the handling of the textures in the cliff sides and in the mountains. And you did a good job dealing with that high dynamic range. Maybe we could crop down just a little bit and by cropping out some of that sky, brings the attention more into the water and into the cliff sides, because it is a beautiful sky, but the sky probably isn't why we're there, you know?
Yeah. Right.
Allow that sky to be a bit more of a placeholder. And I think that's all I got to say about that. If we totally reset it, that's where we started before I started throwing sliders around and stuff.
Yeah.
But always watch out for these intrusions on the edges of frames, especially when it's like the only tree in the frame. You don't want it to be like on the edge, because the eye just goes boom straight to it.
Yeah. Understood.
Love that foreground. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
that is so much cool.
Yeah.
You can tell that this was carved by a glacier. That's really cool.
And just the curve to it is just really
Yeah.
like, it's like an amphitheater kind of feel.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I need to go back to all the files I have, because I honestly may be able to just simplify this into a much narrower, just kind of grabbing that, I don't know, central portion there from kind of the edge of the tree to the end of the. Yeah.
Just eliminating that tree, or just enough of the tree to where you clone out some of the distraction of what remains. That way you could leave this. And then the reason I brought in this side is because when you're cropping, it always feels natural to crop either at the top of a peak or at the base of a peak, but very seldom does it feel comfortable to crop on a slope, because the viewer is like, well, I want to see what else is there. But if we just move that up to here, you know, looking at that peak there, it feels like a more comfortable place to crop.
Makes sense.
It's just one of those weird psychological things. So next image, I love the colors and textures in the Badlands here. Like, you know how we're kind of talking about how every image has a theme. And to me, it's about texture and color, especially in the foreground. I think the sky doesn't add like anything at all to it. And for that reason, I would try, again, we have those kind of really hazy blues in the background. So one of the things that I would be tempted to do is, if I opened this up inside of Photoshop, we'll open it up as a smart object, I would have this version of the photo where I'm going to really enhance the color, because I want, when I increase the saturation, watch what happens to the Badland areas. See how those striations get really nice and vibrant, and they stand out more, as opposed to where it was, which was there. But what I hate about this adjustment is what it does to the sky. So what I would do is I would do one layer where I've done that to the foreground, and it's purely for foreground. Then I'd create a new smart object via copy. And then in this version, we're going to go in, we're going to undo what I just did. And then I'm also going to go in and go into the color mixer, and we're going to desaturate the blue channel. That way those blues are not so eye-catching. Blues in the aqua channel. And maybe, you know, I would also be tempted to just bring it down just a little bit like that. And so you have these two very different renditions of the same photo. And then you start blending them in with each other. So, you know, there's a lot of different ways you could do it. I think the way that I would probably start is I'd put a black layer mask on it, and then we could go and just go image or select sky, start off with the sky selection, paint that in, which will get us down to the horizon line, but it's not going to fix our below the horizon line area. But then you could go in and be like, okay, let's make a selection of blues. So I could go into TK action, start with blue, and you can see that the blues are very selected. I could click on that one button where we can select things more or less, and then I'll select the blues all the way, but I'll also remove yellows and remove magentas and make some room so I can see the rest of the sliders and remove reds. That way we've got a really nice selection of those background blues. We'll select that and then go in and then just paint that in. So we're desaturating those blues so they don't grab the eye anymore.
Ah, yes.
Also, one of the things that is tricky about this one, because I can see the problem that we're going to run into, is it's almost centered, but not quite. And I can tell that, like, if I try to just crop into where it's perfectly centered, we're going to be cropping in on that dune in the background.
Yeah, that was the challenge I had here. And that was one of my questions here because I found the Badlands hard to, I mean, it's interesting
yeah.
to look at, hard to shoot, almost a place where you just have to get the long lens out and
Yeah.
not
And
try to take these bigger landscape photos.
but you did an awesome job of finding a striking shape. You know,
Oh, yeah.
obviously we have this nice pointy, it feels like a mountain range, you know. You did a great job with that. I think this works really well. One of the things that you could do is, so this is a couple steps. So follow me here, guys. I'm going to create so we'll save this for the very end of the edit. And what I would consider this is like making things symmetrical. So at the very end of the edit, you'd create a merge visible layer. So Control Shift Alt E or Command Option Shift E. And that creates this layer. Now what we're going to do is we're going to select the very center of the mountain range. So what we want to be the center of the photo. So I'm dragging over from the left and then go into this, what looks like the center of our, you know, of what we want to be the center of our photo. And I'm going to copy that. So I'm going to go Control or Command C for copy. And then I'm going to go Control or Command V for paste. And it gives me this layer, right? And then I'm going to go down to, I'm going to hide that and go back to our merge visible layer. Actually, before I do that, hold on. We're going to Control or Command click on this, the layer that we just created. So we'll click on that. And it's hiding my marching ants. I don't want it to do that. But so if we have this layer here and I go Control or Command A, no, that's not going to do it. Shit. Come on. I should be able to just click on that. Yeah. Okay. So I held down Control and I clicked on this layer 2. And that basically is just giving me a selection of what we just copied. So what we want to do now that we have that up is we'll go down to the layer below. So this layer below is selected. Now what we want to do is copy the rest of it. So what we need to do is go right click and then select inverse. And that's going to move my marching ants to this side. And because we're on this merge visible layer, we're going to make a copy. So Control C for copy, Control V for paste. And so now here on our layers tab, let me drag this up, maybe. I'll make my thumbnails large. We've got 2 different sides with the 2 different halves of the photo there. So what we want to do is first I'm going to go up to this top photo and hit Control or Command T. And then this way I can warp it. I'm going to hold down the Shift key and drag this to the left. And when I get to the center, you can see it's going to snap. And then I hit Enter. And then I'm going to select this side hit controller command T, hold down shift, and then I'm going to drag it over like that.
Oh, look at
Oh,
that.
wow.
And now
Wow.
it's symmetrical. So if
I
I
knew
hide,
that, Nick, but thanks for showing me. And no.
so if I put
But
these in
that
a
was
group and I
control
just turn
Nick,
this off
that's
and
a little
on,
too basic for us.
Yeah.
Right.
That's holy
Wow.
moly. That's
Very
incredible.
cool.
Yeah.
and I mean, it's not like ridiculous, like manipulation. We're not making the mountains bigger or anything. We're just like making something that was almost symmetrical.
Yeah.
And the final result is pretty like it's
Wow, that's
pleasing,
really
you know?
cool.
So
Yeah.
now it's like perfectly symmetrical. I would probably lose just a little bit of sky. That way it feels, you know, like it's more an image about the everything below horizon line. It brings the attention down. And that's where I was going with that. I'm sorry it took so long to explain. But
Very cool.
that's a
I love this image. It's got a painterly kind of feel, which
Yeah.
I think is hard to pull off in with like mountains and stuff. It's really kind of calming, which is odd because it's got all those jagged shapes, but it's
well, and
just
it's a
like
hell of a
it's
lot.
calming to look at.
It's a
It's
hell of a lot
nice.
more calming now that it's symmetrical too. Like when something is
Yeah.
almost symmetrical, there's something that just like makes me like uncomfortable. But yeah, I love this
Yeah.
image. And just by desaturating the blue channels, it puts all the emphasis on the color that is there, which is all those beautiful striations of red. It's a beautiful image.
Very good. Thank you.
So that would be my feedback for that.
Cool.
Let's go back. So let's go to the Spirit Falls image. I love the shutter speed choice for foreground. Like this is the perfect amount of texture in my mind. This is like always what I'm trying for, where it's you got all the motion, you know, implied motion and motion blur you could want, but it's still textured. You know, it hasn't turned to marshmallow water. So love that shutter speed here. That same shutter speed, however, though, doesn't work quite as well on the background waterfall. You notice like it's just got this kind of stuttery, broken feel.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm guessing this is like a fifth or a tenth or not a tenth, fifth or a sixth of a second, if I had to guess.
Yeah, I want to say a sixth of a second if I remember. I was just looking at this. Yeah.
So one of the little tricks for figuring out the perfect shutter speed choice is you're watching the waterfall over the waterfall, and you basically time how long it takes for a piece of water to fall from here to there. And whatever that is becomes the ideal shutter speed for that background. So in this case, I know from experience, it actually takes like more of like a half second shutter speed to get that, you know, unbroken look for the background. But a fifth and a sixth of a second looks awesome for foreground. So one of the things that I do is I take an image at both shutter speeds, and then I just mask in that background. That way I get the desired shutter speed for both sides. Sometimes I even do it to where I shoot background waterfalls at like a 1/250th or 1/500th of a second. So I can get all of that cool curtainy texture in the background. But then I smooth out that shutter speed in the foreground with like a fifth of a second. That way I get the best of both worlds. So that might be something to try the next time you're around a waterfall, is to try hold your composition and shoot it with a couple of completely different shutter speeds. That way you can have either, you know, a really silky background but textured foreground, or the opposite, you know, a textured foreground with like, you know, a really fast shutter speed for the foreground or for the background.
Yeah, and I've got several images that have different shutter speeds. So
Cool.
I guess in that case, then if I do find something to your point, now, of course, it's obvious anytime someone points these things out,
Yeah.
then it's a matter of blending the two together.
Yeah. Love the warm tones of the foliage in the background. I really like that. A couple of little things is you see this. To me, that looks almost like some kind of masking error. So you might go back because it's this really sharp round line.
I see that. Yeah.
So you might go back and check your layers for that. Another little thing is sky poking through back here. Well, I'll quickly show you a little tip. If I open this up in Photoshop, wait for it, go over to Photoshop. And then let's say that I've created a couple layers. I can create my merge visible layer. One of the little tricks that I'll do is I'll take a clone stamp tool, change the blend mode to darken, and then I'll sample from somewhere bright. So yeah, honestly, like somewhere over in here. And then I'll go over to this area and I'll just go in like that. And by sampling from somewhere with bright foliage, you're just bringing in bright foliage and replacing that sky with kind of background bright foliage. And you're getting rid of how distracting those areas with
Got
the
it.
sky poking through are. So
Yeah.
do you
that
know
was one
this
of
trick
those.
already?
No, but I wasn't no, I wasn't sure how. I mean, I know what you're talking about when you look at it, but like, how am I going to fix all these tiny holes? And
Right.
I didn't feel like I could crop it out of my composition. So
Yeah. So that's one of the things that I'll do is I'll just go in and I'll fill by changing the blend mode of this clone stamp to darken. If I try to, you see, like if I make this big, you can see that I've got really bright
gotcha.
foliage.
Yeah.
So because I'm cloning from way over here where it's bright. So if I try to go over this tree trunk, nothing happens, which means I can just go over all these gaps and it leaves all those darker limbs and stuff. It leaves those alone. It's only going to affect those areas with the sky because it's the blend mode is set to darken. So I could be quick and dirty about it and just get rid of those skies.
Yes.
The other thing you could do, so this is the old school way. The other thing you could do is if we got rid of that layer is the remove tool is getting kind of ridiculously good. So you could literally just go over an area with a remove tool and it's probably going to do a perfect job. But sometimes it looks a little unnatural if you have areas that should have sun poking through and they don't. So I prefer the darken blend mode with the clone stamp more, but that's just a little trick. I'm sorry. I can't help myself but nerd out on Photoshop. But back to this image. Also, it's a different composition than you typically see. A lot of times people include more, down here. So I really like the simplicity of this composition where you got lines going this way, lines going this way, nice symmetrical rock. So really good job on the composition. All
Very
right.
good.
Next image. Again, I really like the post-processing on this. Like it's got the right amount of mid-tone contrast. You brought out all the saturation in a really beautiful, natural way to where you have cold tones and warm tones. I think my only critique is, and it's not even really a critique, but when you have really strong conical shapes, it feels like they need to be a little bit more towards the center of the frame. Because to me, looking at this, I love the layers, but my eye always goes to the peaks. And it's kind of like, oh, and I just now noticed the guy. Took me a long time to notice that. But I love the guy for scale. I think that the eye is kind of drawn to this area though, not only because it's brighter, but because it's conical. So your processing is spot on. I would just like to see this a little bit more central to the frame. And that's literally my only critique because the processing's perfect. What do you guys think about that? Because this is just because I say something does not make it right. I want to also point out. What do the other people think?
I actually think it's balanced with the conical shape on the right.
That's what I thought. That's to my eye, those shapes and the one to the left. But again, that's just all personal preference.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. My only comment was don't edit out that person because that really adds to it.
Yeah. I like having the guy
Nick,
for scale.
Nick, how do you bring, so like you mentioned, I just saw the guy and he does get hidden because I capture him. He's kind of in the crack of that.
Yeah.
How do you, do you try to bring that out more? Can you?
I don't
Or
think
is
you
it just-
can, other
yeah.
than like, ideally you would have him silhouetted against something brighter.
Right.
So if you had a frame of him back here, I would take that.
Yeah.
I think it's actually, there's a second picture here that we're looking at almost right now of getting
Yeah.
tighter on the guy.
Yeah.
Because then you still get the same scale, but like you could do all that. And I guess it might be better if they were walking, if there was more in front of them than behind them. So you could always flip it too, probably,
Yeah.
and nobody would know. But
Yeah.
I think there's just this other picture in there that's just him. That's a little more about him and a little less about all the hills.
Yeah.
That's
Mhm.
Nick's thing. Like, what is the theme of this? Like, is the theme the person and
Yeah.
man versus nature, or is the theme, a second theme is all the beautiful, like the hills that look almost like rolling skin, you know, they
Yeah.
kind of got this like organic effect to them. There's multiple things going on here.
Yeah. And I think that that's the thing
Well-
is like, if, you know, obviously it's your image. So what you were thinking at the time, like if you are really, thank you. If you were really thinking about the way that this conical shape balances with this, maybe just bringing out that shape with a little bit of dodging would help emphasize that, you know, or if it's a little bit more about, you know, the guy being, you know, adding scale, maybe just making sure that he's on a third of some kind. So, you know, bringing it a little bit closer to him compositionally would allow the eye to notice him more. Part of the reason that we don't notice him immediately is because of where he is in the frame,
Yes.
because he's
Yeah.
not on a third. It's just kind of an awkward framing for him, you know?
Yep.
So, yeah, and that's the thing is like, you know, there's no right way here. Like it's a bunch of patterns, and it's the way that the photographer decides to decipher those patterns. But your job as the photographer is to really force people to see what it is that you were seeing. And the best way to do that is to emphasize some things and to de-emphasize others. And, you know, because we have so many beautiful colors and beautiful patterns, to me, when I first look at this image, that's what I notice is just, you know, kind of a palette of colors and patterns, and nothing, there's no hierarchy. I suck at saying that word, hierarchy. There's nothing standing out more than anything else. So to me, my eye goes to things that are different, and things that are different here to me are conical bright shape and a little splash of that kind of turquoise color in the background. So my eyes go there first, and then they start to explore everything else. And then about 2 minutes into the frame, you're like, oh, and there's a guy, you know? So I think trying to emphasize something through just a little bit of dodging or a little bit of de-emphasizing other things. Like one of the things that I tend to do a lot in images like this is just to like recover highlights in areas that I don't want the eye to go. So if I, you know, take something like this and just, well, highlights aren't really quite cutting it, but just creating a subtle gradient, just kind of nudging the eye towards what I want it to look at, because otherwise everything is equal. So the eye is going to look everywhere. So, you know, you could do it through color a little bit, just cooling down this foreground. You can do it through luminosity by darkening the foreground. That way it gives the eye the opportunity to kind of go back. And just by doing that little subtle darkening, it brings the eye up. And you could do a similar thing from the sides, you know, just recover some highlights in the background areas. That way the eye kind of goes here. So if you notice before, and then if I go after, or well, actually this is before, this is after. Oh, I also did a crop.
Yeah,
Sorry.
but I actually like it better the way that
Okay.
you cropped it. Yeah, I mean, look, this was my first trip ever to Death Valley, and I found this Zabriskie Point super interesting. There's so much going on here
Yeah.
that
Oh,
it's
yeah.
probably ideally just get your long lens out and look for interesting stuff, right? So,
Yeah. It's just beautiful, especially this was probably pre-sunrise.
This was just before sunrise.
Yeah.
Actually, no, I take that back. This was actually on a very I was just out there. It was extremely wet and overcast. So this
Oh,
was
okay.
because we were out there a second time. So this is actually afternoon, believe
Oh,
it or
wow.
not. But quite cloudy. Yeah.
Is that pointing to the east?
You know, I
Uh,
don't know my
north.
orientation there. I hiked up, if there's a viewpoint, I hiked up quite a ways up to the right
Yeah.
of
Yeah,
the
I know this
viewpoint.
Oh
exact
yeah,
spot. So here you're
yeah.
looking straight south, actually.
No, okay.
So you're on kind of the north looking to the south. So sunrise is left and sunset is right.
That sounds right, Nick. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful image, beautiful processing. I think just try to find something to emphasize would be the thing there.
Okay.
And then again, really good processing. I love the even though this is a big dynamic range scene, you processed it in a really natural way to where you don't even realize, oh, like that background's really bright and the foreground would have been really dark. So you did a good job exposure blending here, or at least managing the contrast. I will say a couple things. This foreground might be a tiny bit too color neutral, you know, like there's no color tint to the foreground, even though I know that this would have been in the shade. So
Yeah.
you could have been a little bit, you could have made it feel like the foreground blended a bit more, you know, obviously not that far, but give it that kind of warmer tint. Or you could have really shown off how cold it would have been and make it feel like it's in the shade, but it feels so neutral. Like, and it's
Yeah,
not a bad thing.
this image felt like it should look a whole lot better just based on what I saw, right?
Yeah.
It's there. I'm super close to this foreground, hiked up to this area, and I did blend a couple of different images, had to straighten out the trees and so forth. So it's pretty
Yep.
wide angle, but
Yep.
yeah, it just felt way flat. I love the soft light on the peaks, but to your point, the foreground just felt dead, I guess. So
Right. And I think so, you know, let's pretend for a moment. Let me just do this where I'm going to drag this over foreground and let's kind of bring it back down to where it probably would have been. So out of camera, it probably would have been something like this, right?
yeah, pretty close. Yeah.
So there's a couple different ways you could have done it. You could have left it dark, and this is the way that I'll often operate. Is I'll leave that foreground pretty dark, but you notice that, you know, we still have plenty of shadow information. So already this feels pretty natural. And honestly, like we have a visual path now. Like if we go back to this and reset it, eye doesn't really get past foreground. Like it really
Yeah.
struggles to get to mountains.
Yeah, great point. Yeah.
Now, like the eye goes back there. And the idea for me when you have a foreground is you want the foreground to give a sense of place for that background, but you don't want it to dominate the photo either. So, you know, one of the easiest ways to really take control over that is just through dodging. So start with this darker foreground and then just kind of go in and let's say what I like to do is let's start off with say greens. So I'm going to make a selection of the green tones in that foreground. So I'm going to really select greens and yellows. And maybe we'll go back TK and just add a tiny bit of contrast to this. So basically I'm creating my stencil for dodging and burning. And then I'll go back TK and let's create a dodge burn layer. So I start off with a dodge burn layer. Let's change the blend mode to overlay. And I'll just zoom in and maybe sample what's already there, but I'm going to shift it. So we're going brighter, but I'm going to shift it towards warmer. That way it ties in with that background light a little bit, kind of like maybe some of that warm light that's off to the right is just, you know, influencing color a little bit. So we've got a warmer light than is actually in this foreground. And then we'll just kind of go in and add some highlights to some of these leaves. And you see before, after. And what we're going to do is just add some dimensionality to some of this foreground so it's not as flat, but we're also working in some of that background tone and color. So it's going to kind of tie it together. That way this foreground feels like it's, you know, being
Connected to
influenced
the
by that
background,
background light.
Yeah.
What was that?
I said connected to the background. Yeah,
Yeah,
that was a
exactly.
struggle, I
Through
think.
through color and tone.
Yeah.
And try to kind of tie it together. So like some of these foliages that are already being hit with light, we can add a little extra to it. And I'm working fast and dirty here just for illustrative purposes. So it's not going to be the best job in the world. Honestly, you could just do big passes too if you wanted. But once you've done a little bit of that, before, after, and if we look at it globally, like the before and after, you notice what it's really done to, like, if we look at the relationship from these foreground leaves and that background, it's maintained the, you know, the shadow depth, but we've brought out those highlights, and we've brought out those highlights with the tone that's happening in the background. So it really matches and really blends. I don't really care for what I did there, but like these foreground leaves, it looks really nice. And then you could do similar things where, like, you know, you could go in and create something that's biased towards the reds, right? So we can really select those reds a lot. Go back TK9, make a selection of it. Ideally, you do this on its own layer, but then we hold down Alt or Option, sample that red tone, but then let's push it a little bit more towards that warm light that's happening in the distance. Go in and just bring out some of the edges of these. And again, I'm working quick and dirty, but
Yeah.
but by doing this, it brings a lot more dimensionality to this because
That's awesome. Yeah.
because it's leaving the shadows alone, but emphasizing the highlights on the edges of those. And the other useful part of this is that we're in control over where we choose to do this. You don't have to do it everywhere. And so just doing that little bit, zoom out here, before, after, before, after. So we're allowing the eye to notice the important parts without just brightening the whole thing. That's like what I'm getting at.
I just need the Nick Page button then in Photoshop. Very good.
Right, exactly. Someday there'll be a Nick Page slider in Adobe Camera Raw. But yeah, so that's how I would manage is I'd leave it dark and subdued, but then just draw attention to my favorite parts. And by doing that, it really helps.
No, you hit on exactly really what I was, you know, this scene should have looked better than it did. And now it's obvious, but very good feedback. Thank you.
All right, cool.
What I have a question. What about those trees that are kind of listing to
Yes.
the left? They kind of point out.
Yeah, so
Would you
that
fix those?
that was what I intended on talking about, was two things.
Yeah.
It's while it's cool that we have a moon in the frame, it's at an awkward place. So I would literally clone out the moon, which is blasphemy, I know. But the moon needs to be about this big, behind, partially hidden behind the peak. No, I would get rid of the moon. I would also go in and, like we talked about in Brian's image, go down to the transform and then maybe constrain the crop. And then looking at these trees up here, just tilt it to where they're standing up. And, you know, do a little bit of that. And then now these trees over here are pretty close to being straight up and down.
Got it. Yeah.
And then crop in just the tiniest bit. Another thing that I do is, like, if we have flowers that are partially cut out, I just clone those out with green foliage. That way all the flowers feel like they have a place, you know? So yeah, that's my feedback. But getting back to, like,
Beautiful
globally,
image. Yeah.
like, beautiful processing, it's just like these tiny little things that you could make it better, you know? Shutter speed choice here, I think, for background, just blending two different ones, you know, allowing, since this image is about color, allowing the color that matters to really stand out and be saturated, but downplay the colors that don't add. And then be careful with a panorama stitch.
Yeah.
Yeah, but excellent images, man.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Are you guys tired of hearing me talk yet?
No, not at all.
All right. Well,
That
that makes,
was amazing what you did to that picture from Glacier.
yeah. All right, David, you're up. So we're going to start
Okay.
talking about your shots here. So like that you have some drone images mixed in. I can't believe that you've done so much. These are freaking beautiful. So looking at these, absolutely love the light spreading through that low hanging fog. That is so beautiful.
It
And
was almost an accident. I wasn't going to take that picture. I
really,
just knew it was a cool, really cool morning. And I know this valley that gets full of fog, and I thought I'd run down and fly my drone up there, and look at that.
wow,
That
that's
was
just awesome.
total luck. I wish I'd have caught the whole bend there. It's kind of off to the bottom, but salmon run up that, believe it or not.
Wow, that's awesome. I think this image and this image from Vic, like I've never seen this composition before. Doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, but still, like I love seeing a place that I know in a different way. So that is really, really cool too.
I'm sorry to go off. Did you ever get a black crust pizza right up there?
I did not, never
That's great.
have.
You'll have to do it.
Huh. So I think looking at these two drone images really stand out to me. I love the uniqueness of this one, because it's so doubtful that somebody has taken this image, that like this is all you, it's all your own. And there's so much good in this image. I really, really enjoy this shot. This is beautiful.
That's awesome.
So let's start here at the beginning. This was the Olympic National Park shot, and
Yeah, all day, and that's the best that I came up with.
that's the best
I have
I could
many,
do.
I have many other shots that you see that stack in the back, which is a really cool feature. It's really
Yeah.
tight there. So anyway.
So I mean, processing wise, like it's all nice and solid, but like you said, it's the composition. It just doesn't tell much of it doesn't force the viewer to look at something. Like there is a nice like kind of pattern to it in that it's symmetrical. You have like these monoliths on either side, but what it's framing is not terribly, interesting, because half of the frame is being taken up by sky. So something that when you're struggling on something like this, you kind of have to ask yourself, okay, what if I go home and I tell the story of this place? What is it that would make it into that story? Like, go home, tell your wife, like, oh, it was so beautiful. Like, what would make it into that story? And I'm guessing that, the sky probably wouldn't have been part of it. But, you could use this kind of framing to tell a bit more of a story just by bringing it down like this, eliminate some of that sky. And now the eye works in a completely different way. Now it feels like that background has gotten taller and more impactful into the frame, and the eye is not escaping out the edges. So there's actually kind of a funnel for the eye.
Mm-hmm.
You could even do a bit more of that by creating a bit more of a gradient in that sky. But one way that you can force the eye to look at things is just by the crop, and like if we go back to the way it was with the horizon line where it is, it forces the eye to look up. But if we bring the horizon line down to where, like, ideally I would want to even go down here, but we can't really do that. We brought it this far down, it forces the eye to go down. And now the eye is much more free to roam some of the stones and the textures. And you did a really nice job of bringing out those textures. It's just all about where
And wait for low tide.
yeah, it's all about where you choose to put that horizon line. And
Thank you.
And just knowing that the eye is always drawn to highlights, you have to really be thoughtful about what highlights you're including. You know, when you have a bright sky like this, it serves as a big distraction unless it is the main attraction, which it's not in this case. So the more you can recover that sky and keep it natural, the more the viewer's eye will be allowed to frame. But when I'm on a beach, most of the time I'm there for the movement of the ocean. You know, that's why I go to the ocean, is to see the ocean, not necessarily to see the shoreline as much. But that doesn't mean it's the only way to do it. Did you take any like water movement images while you were there?
No, I don't think so. The only thing I did differently, there might have been some other shots to the right of that stack that had the sun, sun star or something like that.
Sure.
It's just a gorgeous place, took some pictures of the sea anemones and starfish and stuff, but it was just a great place to be. So
yeah, it's a beautiful beach, and that part of the coast is just so vibrant and cool, with the trees growing out of the rocks.
Coast with big pine trees and ocean.
Yeah. So I think that's why, in my opinion, this composition doesn't work very well, is because it's almost telling the viewer to look at the sky, because it's framing the sky, it's tilted up towards the sky, and just by cropping down on it, it completely changes the visual path of the image. Like, that's too much, but you get the idea. It forces the eye to look down, so that's something to be thoughtful of next time you're out. So this was the image that you were curious of, if it's savable.
You see the file name, the mess. Yeah. The mess is
mess.tiff.
Yeah. So
right.
The problem is it's a stack. There's a 4-minute exposure of the sky, and that's on a tracker. So that means the tree in that frame is blurry.
Yep.
And so I think I healed it out or something. And then the foreground is 4 minutes of without the tracker. And so I just had a heck of a time trying to mask that tree to where the sky looked normal behind it.
Yep. So that's one of I was going to say, that's one of the reasons I don't even use trackers, is because really the only way to do it is you would need to move to an area where you have an unobstructed view of the sky, then use your tracker, because, anything that's overlapping that sky is also going to get blurred because, the camera is moving. And then you can come back and then you can composite that in. But at that point, like, you might as well be dropping any random, night sky image from any other night, because literally it doesn't even line up.
Next year to
What was
do
that?
exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. But having said that, like, you got great detail in your shadows. Like, you have a nice foreground here. It's just that the way that I shoot night images is without a tracker, and I'll do like a long exposure for my foreground, probably like you did. Yeah, I see 242 seconds. I don't know if that's settings for the sky or the foreground, but
probably both. They're similar.
Okay.
Just one tracker on.
And then I'll just do like a 20-second long exposure for the sky. Do that at like ISO 4000 or something. And honestly, that, as good as noise reduction is and stuff, like, I don't really see much of a difference in the quality of a night sky image. Like, granted, if you track it, like, it's a little bit more noise free, but it's not worth the hassle of dealing with that, like,
the question really was whether it's even possible to be saved or not. So
yeah. And
I understand.
Yeah, the only way to do it would be to go, past the tree, tilt up, take that image, and then come back. And ideally, in that image, you'd want your horizon line much lower in the frame. That way you can take your sky image and bring it down. So, like, because you can make the background work simply by just shifting the sky image down. That way you've only got one horizon rather than two. But you'll never be able to make the area around this tree work. The only way you could potentially make it work is if you had one short shutter speed of the sky. you could mask that in around the tree and then
Mhm.
bring in the tracked version of the sky outside of the tree and then kind of finesse it back and forth. But that would also be a headache. So,
Okay, thank you.
yep. So my opinion is get rid of the tracker, but that's an unpopular opinion. So maybe don't listen to me. So this is probably my favorite image of the set. I love that light. I love the blues. Like you have a color. I mean, there's just so much to like in here. Couple like compositionally, because our brightest highlights are kind of down right here on this edge, it makes me want to either see more or see less of it. And so like I would be very tempted to want to like just scoop back just a little bit so we can see this curve that's being cropped just
Yeah.
a little bit. And so we could see whatever that is that's getting hit by that light. But other than that, maybe the best thing to do would be to just crop it out entirely. So it's not a temptation, but then you lose this curve. So maybe you'd have to crop here, which still has some of this, but I think this crop and then cloning out this, I think would be maybe the best choice, the neutral ground there. That, and in order for highlights to be really impactful, they need to be next to shadows. And you notice, like, if we look at our histogram, our shadows are way up in our midtones. So you could stand to kind of bring this down just a little bit. And now the eye really follows those highlights a bit more. Also, by bringing the exposure down just a little bit, the blues take on a little extra saturation as well. So maybe that would be something to try, is just going just the tiniest bit darker, just so the eye really notices these highlights. You can even add a little bit of contrast here. So these blues really get nice and deep and vibrant. So that's really the only critiques I have, because man, I love
What a beautiful image.
yeah,
Gorgeous.
it's gorgeous. It's a beautiful image. Maybe you could go in and like try to minimize some of the highlights here just because of where they're placed in the frame. You don't really want bright highlights so close to the corner, but it's gorgeous. Maybe add just the tiniest bit of magenta, just because there's some kind of cyany greens back here. But it's a beautiful image. Maybe just the tiniest bit darker would be my feedback. And then once you go darker, getting rid of this little bit of distraction, you could just literally just clone in from this watery texture, fill that in, and then you'll have this nice curve for the base, rather than, if we totally reset, rather than having this distraction being cut off. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Cool. Does everybody agree with that? Or, by the way, you guys are allowed to disagree with anything I say, just so you know.
I'm gonna say it's a horrible image. No, it's like so jealous. It's like it's incredible. Like,
Yeah. It makes me want
just-
to pay more attention when we get a foggy day.
I guess so.
just-
Yeah.
The light, the light for me just has so much power. It feels like it's just like blasting through.
Yeah.
It's just really something.
Wish I could claim credit for that, but it was just luck.
Make your own luck.
I
Yeah.
just wake up and say, I know I can catch some strong light down at the PM River.
Yeah. That's gorgeous.
It was,
And
and I think it's unique too. I mean, there aren't a lot of images that look like this.
right. And like, you know, the way that you have these little trees to interact and create these shadows. Like,
Yeah.
that's the thing about, you know, mornings like this, is there, and an image like this, is there's all kinds of little images in here too, you know?
And
Like-
and you should see the movie. It is awesome. The video.
Oh, really?
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
Because mostly I was just video.
You're going to have to start a YouTube channel now just for this one morning. It's gorgeous. Yep. So over to the Iceland image. Again, beautiful,
Wow.
beautiful conditions. Love that foggy. Was it raining? Or is
Oh
it just-
yeah, risk my drone there too. It did rain. There's a big water spot right about where your hourglass is.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
don't actually
A
see it.
really ugly water. So this is like my first attempt at Photoshop, so I didn't do much. I didn't do much with it except like a little curves thing or something and took the
Mhm.
spot out. But I think when I did it in Lightroom, I just cropped down to where I didn't have any sky. And then I used like dehaze or something to get a little bit of that fog out of the background. But it was just such a gorgeous place.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd highly recommend that hike to anybody. It's near that
Yeah.
glacier lagoon.
I think I like including the sky in this case.
Yeah, I do too.
Because because the way that cliff face is shaped, it's just got such cool character.
Yeah.
So again, like one of the things that I'm a nerd about is I like to have color contrast, and here it's neutrals with greens, which totally works. But my initial curiosity is like, what would it look like if we just pushed it a little colder? That way, some of these neutral tones felt a little colder. I don't know that that's a good choice, but that's my first curiosity. I don't know that I like it. Yeah, I don't know. But the other technical thing that I notice is there's this line in the top. So don't know what created that. You see what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
If we add contrast, darken it down, you see this?
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
Did you maybe extend the canvas or
I don't-
extend the sky?
I don't know how to do that. Is that people up? Wow.
Yeah, there's people up
No,
there.
I don't know how to do that. I don't know what that could be as on the sensor.
No, I don't think so. But that's easy enough to fix. You just clone it out. There's also this cool bird. See that bird?
Oh yeah, yeah.
But the
Uh-huh.
the people here, that gives you a sense of scale, doesn't it?
Wow.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Oh, that's such an awesome place. I flew through there to risk my drone.
So something else, like one of the things that I always do when I get an image into Lightroom, my own images, is I just throw sliders around, I play with it, and I see how stuff looks dark and bright and everything. As we look at it a bit more, we notice just how bright this is. It's a very, very bright image. You might think about going just a little bit darker, or at least darker down towards the bottom portion of the photo. So if we started with something,
would you do anything in Photoshop to like you were showing earlier with correcting or improving that image of glacier when you would use a luminosity mask or something and go in there and just to give it some more three-dimensional look?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just open it inside of Photoshop. I tend to work kind of in reverse, where like I like to start with a dark image and then brighten bits up.
Uh-huh.
So let's try this, where let's just start from a slightly darker place. And the reason I like this is because, we're going to be able to draw the eye into that background if we start darker. So let's just start a little darker and a tiniest bit colder. Not much, just so the greens are less yellow and a bit more green. And then we'll start, say, here. And what I like about this is now we can create another version of this. New smart object via copy. And let's go ahead and brighten this one back up with a little extra contrast. Something like that. So we've got bright version, dark version. And I would start off just whoops, wrong button. I would start off just blending them together at the top. Why am I not? Oh, yeah. I would start off just blending them together from the top because we want that whoa, what the hell was that? We want that atmosphere to be happening fully at the top of the frame. But then starting kind of down in here, I don't want to brighten the shadows. I only want to brighten the highlights of the portion of the image. That way we're creating more dimension rather than just brightening. So I would just go in and let's select something like a lights 1, but I'm going to add a little contrast to it like this. And you notice how cool that looks in black and white. And the reason that looks so cool is because it's emphasizing dimension. And that in order for highlights to be impactful, they need to be next to shadows. And you really get a sense for that when you add this much contrast to something. So I'll make a selection of that. And then we'll go back to this layer mask where we have our brighter version. And I'll just paint in on this. And by doing this, we're brightening the brightest parts, but we're leaving, ideally, the shadows alone. And right now, like our two versions, like if I hold down Alt or Option and click on our layer mask, this is what our layer mask looks like. And you can see how it's just bringing in the brightest parts of that. And because these two versions are not so different, like there's not a huge effect there. But if we go back to our base layer and just darken it down a little extra like that, and then hit OK, we're going to see that there's a lot of dimension being brought through.
Yeah.
So now we can
thanks
just,
for that. That's what I want. That's why I included this one.
and so
Alright.
then we can just kind of bring it in a bit more. And it's really bringing out the dimension there. So if we look at our layer mask, that's what our layer mask looks like. So it's leaving the shadows alone. It's just brightening the highlights. And then of course, because these are both smart objects, you can always be like, okay, well, what happens if we warm up our highlights a bit? Hit OK. What does that look like? And nothing is ever final. I don't think I like that quite as well. So let's back that up. Kind of like the colder fog look. But yeah, that's how I would go about adding that dimension. You could also do the same dodging and burning technique that I showed where, let's say we wanted to emphasize some of the green mosses. Let's click on the green channel. Let's check the yellow channel. The yellow channel is a little better. And we can go to the colors, enhance the yellows, remove the blues, go to TK9, create a dodge burn layer from it, zoom in on what we're wanting to emphasize. So let's say stuff like this. So with my paintbrush, I'll hold down Alt or Option, sample it, brighten it. And then I can just kind of go in and, well, I'm working a little too fast there, but you can go in and just emphasize some of these details that you like. And by leaving the shadows alone, but brightening highlights, you're increasing depth, because all depth is the difference between a highlight side and a shadow side. So that's a little too much. So by leaving the shadows alone, we're making it more three-dimensional. So you just kind of zoom around and find your favorite bits. And then when you zoom out, you turn that layer off and on. Go up to our layer, before, after, before, after.
Yeah.
That's
And
great.
this part of the workflow is like the fun part, you know? And it's also the part that I tend to overdo like every single time, but then I just back off the opacity of it. You know, it's like that's obviously overdone. So I'll go back and there you go. But that's how I do that. You could also do it with the waterfall. So if we just sample that, ideally I would make a more restrictive mask, like one that only will allow my paint to go into the waterfall. But if we just hit this a couple times,
Yeah.
you could add a little bit of extra mist down here. Before, after. So you can really take control over where the eye is going to go. Yep. So that's how I would do that.
All right. Thank you.
Hey, Nick, quick question. We're going back to, so because you had opened these as smart objects, what you're saying is you can make those camera raw adjustments. If you don't like it, it's not destructive, right? You go back and
Exactly.
just
You can-
change it. If you hadn't done that, you can't undo it.
Exactly. Like if you just make some adjustments in Lightroom and then just select edit in Photoshop, you're not going to be able to undo those things that you did in Lightroom. But if you start with a raw file and open it as a smart object inside of Photoshop, then like you you double click on it and you can see all of the things that you've already done inside of Lightroom. And you can be like, okay, well, I don't like that color temperature. Let's try something completely different. Or if you're doing an exposure blend and it's not blending well, you can, if you've opened them up as smart object layers, then you can go in and be like, okay, well, let's darken the foreground and brighten the sky and try to mellow this out so I can actually blend these two images together. So
What are
it's
the
really easy.
downsides of, because I'm trying to understand why you wouldn't always just open them as smart
So
objects.
the two downsides are file size. They're larger files, and
Okay.
and you can't free transform or warp them. So if you're doing a focus stack, smart object layers don't work. So,
Okay.
but that's every other time I always use smart object layers.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right. So let's go into this image. Beautiful. I love this composition of it. Is
Yeah, that's
really
awesome.
a unique scene. And another thing that I like so much about it is that you have these stacks and they're kind of facing the light direction, because we can see that the sun is over in this direction here. And it just feels really natural for them to be, you know, one of the things that I always envision is like when you have very prominent objects in a scene, they always feel like characters, you know, they feel like human characters. And like to have them looking at the sunset feels quite natural, especially since these are supposed to be trolls, you know. So so that I love that part of it. I also like the color tones that you have. You have that nice warm to cool. All of that feels great. The only critique is the amount of sky, or the lack of sky. I think that just having the tiniest bit more sky would make it feel more comfortable. And that's really my only critique for that image, because I like the color, like the processing, like the composition. Maybe just a tiniest bit more sky would make it feel more comfortable, I think.
Yeah, I'm tempted, and it's unnatural just to take a little bit of the darkness out of this close side of those, you know, and get a little detail in them. But that's probably
Yeah,
not,
yeah, absolutely. Those they do
not
get
realistic.
quite dark. But there's still some information there. But yeah, I agree. You could totally just, you know, we could even do this. Oh, almost. And then just lift the shadows. Call it a
Mhm.
day.
Yeah,
Kind of like that. Yeah.
you go.
But really, really nice composition. I really like the different view of a familiar place. I think just a little bit more sky would make it feel more natural. But of these, I definitely love that. That frame is special.
Yeah, great work, David.
Thank you.
All right. Sandy,
My turn.
you're up.
So there's a TIFF and a JPEG
Yeah.
if you, whatever
That's
you
cool.
want to do.
That's perfect. So, yeah, beautiful colors, honestly, in a lot of these. I think what at first glance, the one that stands out to me, ironic, like I like the composition a lot in the Waimea Canyon, but the one that stands out to me is probably this one because of
I know that
beautiful-
one's my favorite.
I love the beautiful symmetry and the pastel colors. It feels like a water painting, and it's at that perfect symmetry that I really appreciate. So I love that frame. It really jumps out to me as that is wall hanging. I could picture people
Yeah, I
buying
was
a
gonna
print
say
of
that could be behind someone's couch. That looks
Absolutely.
like art.
It's just got that beautiful etherealness and beautiful color palette. Really, really like that image.
That center tree is incredible. Like it's
Yeah,
like
exactly.
perfect. It's like
You
like
found-
the perfect tree.
You found order in the chaos. That's big time props. I love that image. Yeah, so I'm trying to remember. You're trying to have some feedback on kind of like how far you've taken processing. Have you
Right.
taken stuff too far? And
Right.
honestly, I think your processing is really good. There is a certain recurring theme that I'll bring up, but let's start with the Waimea Canyon one.
Okay.
Let's see. This one's the TIFF. Let's look at the JPEG. I like the composition here because you have the valley that kind of snakes through vertically, and I think it was a really smart choice to go vertical in this case.
Mhm.
The one thing that I feel like I've said this quite a few times today, maybe it's just a Nick thing, but in order for highlights to be really truly impactful, they need to kind of be next to shadows. And I think just starting from a darker place, like watch what happens to how much the eye notices the light when we darken it down.
Okay.
You
Yeah.
see how, like, as we darken it down, and if we envision the if the areas that are getting hit with light, if we try to in our mind's eye expose for those and make those midtones, or those be fairly upper midtones, and allow those shadows to go dark, suddenly the eye really notices the dapple light. But if we go back to this, you notice how the eye doesn't even really acknowledge the dappled light as much, because we're kind of exposing the viewer's eye to the shadows rather than the highlights. So in this case, I would draw more attention to where the dappled light's hitting by allowing those shadows to go a little darker.
Okay.
So something I would be curious to know, and these are your master files, so let's just open one. And we'll open the original. I just want to see your layers here. Come up. This is what a Wacom tablet's not good for. Why are you not coming up? Anyway. So starting the base. Okay, so you did some topaz denoise. In your topaz denoise layer, first of all, start opening your images as smart objects. That way you can undo those original edits as well. In your so in your denoise, do you remember if you did any sharpening?
It probably only had the little bit of sharpening.
Okay.
you
Because
know.
that's one of my main critiques of a lot of the images. Like if we kind of look at them together, when we zoom in here, we've got quite a bit of kind of, I would say, like a large
Over
grain
sharpen?
type sharpening, almost like a
Oh, okay.
grainy crunchiness.
Okay.
And I see it a lot in all of the images, honestly. Like there's kind of that grainy, aggressive sharpening here. I don't see it in this one.
All right.
And I see it a little bit on the moose image. And actually, I don't see it in this one either. But it seems like there's a type of sharpening that you're doing that is a little over the top.
Okay.
So,
Well, that's very helpful. That's good to know.
and so the way that I sharpen, just quickly, just to show my method of sharpening, is, let's say that I have this image here and I want to sharpen it. I start off with what we call input sharpening, which is like at the raw stage. So I'd either do this Adobe Camera or Lightroom. So I'll bring up my sharpening to the normal level, and I always decrease the radius, increase the detail. So the radius is the size of the sharpening. And to me, it looks like you've increased the radius. And if we let's go really high with this, and let's keep the detail in the middle. If we decrease the radius, it's like a small fine grain. But if we increase the radius, it's a really large kind of crunchy sharpening. It almost becomes clarity instead of sharpening. So by keeping the radius small, it makes it a really small and fine grain, so it can get into those little details, but not overdo them. And then the detail slider is more like if you envision a crack in a windshield and you have like that main crack. If you have the detail slider all the way to the left, it's only going to sharpen the big crack. But if you slide the detail slider to the right, it starts kind of branching out like a spider web, trying to find little things to sharpen. So by having a small fine grain sharpening and keeping that left, but then increasing the detail slider, it's sharpening more things, but with a smaller grain of sharpening. And that's my preferred method. And you can also mask it. Yeah, and then mask it. Exactly. So then I would mask it out to where it's only sharpening details like that. So I suspect that you have your.
That's a very good point, and kind of scary because for the last year or so, I've started all my images the same,
Mm,
you know, and so, but that's very helpful.
okay.
Could you explain that masking real
Nick-
quick when you,
Oh,
when you
yeah,
showed
go
that
ahead.
mask? What
Yeah. So this
was
masking
white, what was
slider.
black?
So by default, if I hold down Alt or Option and I click on the masking slider, everything that is white is getting sharpened the same amount.
Okay,
So Lightroom is by default, this is how Lightroom operates. It's sharpening the noise in the sky. It's sharpening, you know, the blank spaces in the water, it's sharpening it all equally, which means it's sharpening noise, not just details. So what I do is, like, let's say we have an image like this moose image. What I do is I hold down Alt or Option and I slide the masking slider to where it's only sharpening the details. So I don't need it to sharpen the bokeh in the background. I only need it to sharpen the details. So the moose and the hair on the moose and the foreground foliage. And then that would be an appropriate place to slide the masking slider. Every image is kind of different. Like we take this image here, hold down Alt or Option, and we slide it over to where it's no longer sharpening noise. It's only sharpening details. So something like this. And so, like, you know, it makes a huge difference in like night sky images where you don't need to sharpen the noise in between the stars. You only need to sharpen the stars or like the details in the foreground. It makes a huge difference in a lot of images. And you do that by holding on Alt or Option and then clicking on the masking slider.
great,
that's-
thank you.
Really useful thing.
Nick, when do you sharpen? Did you say you sharpen first or
Yeah,
last?
so so this is called input sharpening. So all raw files need a
Input,
little bit
okay.
of sharpening just to kind of get them
Yeah.
started. And then at the very end of my workflow, like if we're over inside of Photoshop, and let's say we're done with this image, if I'm sharpening and publishing to the web, I actually use TK Actions to do my web sharpening. So it has this button here, which brings up this little dialog box. And I'll say, okay, I want this image to be 4,000 pixels tall, or let's say here's height, 4,000 pixels tall. And I want it to do 75% of its sharpening. I can even add my own watermark or whatever by clicking Action. And I want it to convert to sRGB. And then I hit vertical. And what it does is it takes that image and it applies a luminosity mask to it and it resizes it and it gives me my sharpened version of the photo. And then this will be what I use for my website and publishing to Instagram or whatever. And then I'll export
And
that.
that's what you would call output. So there's a difference between input
Exactly.
and out sharpening.
Yeah.
Okay,
So you
got it.
have your input at the very beginning and then your output, which is your very final stage, because obviously I use a different type of sharpening for publishing to Instagram than I would like if I'm going to print. If I was
Sure.
going to print, the way that I would do it is I would go in and selectively sharpen certain areas. Like in an image like this, it's a little different because it's more of a textured image. But let's say an image like this, I would not want to sharpen the sky, probably wouldn't even want to sharpen the background, but I would want to sharpen the cliffs. So I would go in and create a new merge visible layer. I'd go up to filter, sharpen, smart sharpen. And I would kind of zoom in on this area here. And I would find a nice amount of sharpening, hit OK. And then I would mask it in just to the areas that actually benefit from that sharpening. And I'd take care not to sharpen areas that might create more noise for myself, because you're going to notice that in a print where someone on Instagram, like, it doesn't matter, you know?
Very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. So, that's my main feedback on this one. I love the colors. I just wish that we were starting from a place where the shadows were a little deeper. That way the
Okay.
eye can really notice those highlights. And then you could even accentuate that light a little bit.
Okay.
That would be my main feedback here. But I like the starting point for white balance and everything. You did a really nice job of starting with a pretty nice neutral color palette. Maybe you could eliminate some of that background haze just with a little bit warmer color temperature, but yeah, and I love the compositional choice to go vertical here. Is just you need to start from a darker place for these highlights to be impactful.
Okay.
So the Palouse image, this to me feels very much like a wash of one color because it doesn't have that that color temperature or that color balance that I talk about, like where you have contrasting colors. And so one of the ways that I often edit these Palouse images is I will start and and you're editing in Photoshop, obviously. So one of the things that you can do, have you opened any images as smart object layers? Do you know in any of these?
I don't usually, but I will now.
Okay. So like if we go, let's go to your layers here and look at the background. So you started,
You can't read all my words.
right? I just need to make more space over here. I'm not used to having these giant thumbnails, but I did it just so we could see. So this was your starting point. And yeah, like right from the beginning, you have quite a bit of sharpening going in. So
Yeah.
your input sharpening that you're starting out with in Lightroom is too aggressive. And I'm
Okay.
guessing it's because you have a really large pixel radius, or you've just really cranked up the amount.
Okay.
Like are you on your computer now by chance?
Yeah.
Out of curiosity, just like dig through a recent image and show me or tell me what your sharpening
Well, I
settings are.
know what I did on this one. You'll see
Okay.
it says TIFF or edit.
Oh, I see. So it's been open twice.
Yeah,
I
it's
gotcha.
been open twice. And the other one I did the topaz again. So it's the same problem as the last image.
Gotcha. So getting back to like how I would create that color separation here, and it doesn't have to be tons. It's just something to make the highlights stand out from the shadows. Let's say we have this version of the background, and I'll create a second version of it as well. So we've got two layers here, and this would be the way I would start my edit. This base one will open inside Adobe Camera Raw as if it was a smart object layer. And I would start off with this one a little darker, maybe, and a little colder. Something like this. I don't want the shadows blue, but I do want them neutral or just a little bit cold, like that. And then I would have the second version that's going to be, well, I'm so used to smart objects. And we'll have the second version that is warm and bright and contrasty. Something like this. And I'm even going to go in and add a little negative clarity here, just like that. So we've got these two very different renditions of our photo. I'll put a black layer mask on this top layer. And then I'll go and I'll just create a luminosity mask that's going to target highlights. So this does a pretty good job. Let's just add a little extra contrast to it, so it keeps me out of those shadow areas. And then I'll make a selection of that. So I'll go back to TK Actions and hit the selection button. So now I've got a stencil for myself. Now I can go in and essentially it's going to be like painting with sunlight. So anywhere that I paint, the sunlight's going to hit a little extra. So I can choose to do that in the background, or I can choose not to, and we can just emphasize the curves and the foreground layers. And anywhere that I paint, it's like painting with daylight. And by doing that, we're increasing the depth, because as you know, when you're shooting from Steptoe Butte and you have all of that atmosphere you're shooting through, it's like, it's very flat and low contrast. So everything we're doing is geared towards adding contrast. You see how we're just making those highlights really stand out. And what my layer mask looks like after painting through that luminosity mask is this. So it's really restricting where my paint goes. It allows my paint to go into the bright parts, but denies it from going into the dark parts. And the cool part of doing this technique is like, if you think, oh, well, that's a little over warm or whatever, I can go into camera raw filter, or if it was a smart object, I could just double click it. And then we could go to color and we could cool down the color temperature and try to keep those greens a little bit more green and hit OK. And then that just, is reflected there. So that would be my feedback there, is like trying to maintain a little bit more color separation. If we go back to Lightroom and look at the original, you can probably see just how yellow it looks, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So that would be my feedback there. And we're even starting to notice some like sensor noise there. And
I know
think
I don't understand that, but
Well, and
yeah,
I think it's whatever you did with Topaz or the sharpening,
uh-huh.
it's trying so hard to find details that it's actually finding the noise pattern on the sensor and sharpening it.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So I think Topaz is having a
Bad.
negative effect on
Okay.
stuff.
Okay.
So let's go to this image. Completely different story, I feel like, even though this is ISO 5000. That is,
Yeah, I just saw that. That's wild.
Yeah, most of these pictures were taken, this is a family trip. I had my kid, my husband, his wife, and I promised myself no tripods, and I just walked around with one lens, and I just shot what I could shoot without, holding everybody up. And
well, this
so
is
that's why
proof.
it was a little high.
I was going to say, this is proof that composition and moment and all that trumps settings, because, yes, we could nitpick your settings or whatever, but the image is beautiful and it turned out awesome. And what I love so much about it is that you must have ran some kind of Orton effect or something to kind of enhance that dreaminess of it. And I love it. It works so well with it. I think that the color palette is perfect. The symmetry is perfect. The only like tiny little nitpicky things would be like where we chose to crop on this left side. So you see these 3 trunks here. Yeah. Maybe it could be just the tiniest bit. And I mean, just tiniest bit improved by eliminating that. And then in order to keep it symmetrical, we would have to go like that.
Yeah. Okay.
Just so we don't have distractions too close to the edge of the frame.
Okay.
But you got to keep that symmetry. So like I kind of screwed up that symmetry, but I love this frame. I can go back and work on it. I love this frame, and I don't think there's anything I would do.
This is beautiful, Sandy. Yeah. Absolute art. Yeah.
And so this is a perfect case for showing how that web sharpening can really, like, because when you start with kind of a dreamy, not super sharp image, let me show you. We'll just, we'll edit the original. So when I go to do my web sharpening, running it through this. So web sharpening, what it does is it sharpens and then downsizes, which means that it's a really fine grain sharpening, which is really cool. So if we go like 80% opacity, and then hit horizontal, it'll be 4,000 pixels on the long end. And I'll try to let this sit. I don't know if Zoom is going to allow you to see just how much sharpness that adds, but it adds a really nice amount of sharpening for anything web. And images like this that were a little bit dreamy and didn't have much sharpening already applied, this is the really nice final touch. And are you using any kind of like Lumenzia or TK Actions or anything like that?
TK Actions.
Okay, perfect. So you've already got this. Have you been using this before?
Using what? The web sharpening?
Yeah.
No, because I don't post anything.
Well, you probably have a website though, don't you?
Yeah, I guess I don't do special sharpening for the web. I think sharpening, from what I'm learning today, that's my real weakness.
Yeah, I think
it's either too sharp or not sharp enough. Or
yeah, and so the trick is like, do a little bit of sharpening at the beginning, which kind of really helps get the file started, and then do do the rest of the sharpening at the very end. That way it's specific for
Depending on the
where it's
purpose.
going. Yeah. So like, this is something you should definitely print because this picture is awesome. I wish I had it in my portfolio. And just giving it that little bit of extra sharpening really makes all the little details in the trunks and stuff stand out. So check out this sharpen for the web function. And I mean, honestly, you could even run it through this for sharpening for print. You just got to do it a slightly lower opacity. Because what it actually does, if you look over at the layers, is it creates two different versions. It runs it through a sharpening once, and then it runs it through a sharpening a second time, but then puts this as the layer mask on it. That way it masks out any areas that might be over sharpened where you don't get those over sharpening halos. And then it puts it inside a group and then decreases the opacity of that. So you can dial it up. You could even deactivate the layer mask and get crazy amounts of sharpening. Or for print, you could just dial it down to like 50%, and then it's a nice amount of sharpening for print. It's just that little extra something. So
what about
oh yeah,
in the Lightroom, there's like in the Lightroom version, and maybe I missed it, like there's that band on the bottom of color. Do you see that? Like,
oh, this?
Like,
yes.
To the right, yeah, and it kind of stands out. I wonder if you just cropped it up a little bit.
Yeah,
it doesn't change the photo at all, really.
I didn't even notice that, but yeah, now that I'm seeing that little band,
it's not soft like the rest of it. Yeah.
Maybe just that tiniest bit of a crop.
Okay.
Yeah.
It also gives a darker
good catch.
vignette or something.
Yeah, it just makes it less dreamy, and it feels like it doesn't feel natural when I look at it.
Brian, I'm gonna have to ask you to leave. How dare you?
That's helpful, yeah.
But I mean, I would put this on my wall tomorrow.
Absolutely.
I love this photo. Like, it's
just
my
bringing it up just
far.
that little bit does help quite a bit. It gives it a nice non-distracting, platform for the image to sit on, as opposed to this, all that color draws the eye. Yep.
Yeah, no, I get that. Yeah, thank you.
All right, Brian. I don't like you anymore. Catching stuff that I did.
You won't save my life next time. You just washed out to sea.
Exactly. I don't know what happened.
What happened? I told him exactly where to stand. He must not have done
it. I did save his camera, though. I just took it out of his hand as he floated away. All right. So this image, again, it's got that sharpening artifact going on, like just a little over sharpening.
Okay.
So but you've got the raw file, so it's no big deal.
Yeah, I can go fix that.
I do like the amount of shadow details, because I know like a lot of times these moose images, their fur is really dark. So you probably had to open the shadows quite a bit, and you did a nice job with that. My main critique would be composition here. So very centered is like, here is a moose, it's very literal. And when you have a person or animal looking in a direction, it's kind of an opportunity to create a little bit of, compositional direction. So like, because the moose is facing this way, it feels pretty natural to have him on this side looking this way. So you give him some kind of lead room looking that way. So just bringing it in just a little, something like this, it makes the viewer wonder, well, what's he looking at? And at least we have some room this way, as opposed to this, where it just feels like a picture of a moose in the center of a frame. You know what I mean?
No, I get it. Yeah.
So that would be my main critique, is just, putting him on one side of the frame, and it feels natural since he's looking this way to have more breathing room over here. Another cool thing that I don't know if you guys have played around with much is the lens blur effect in Lightroom that they've added. So when you have something like this that has a depth of field to it, where we have an out of focus foreground or background, you can emphasize that now inside of Lightroom. So like there's places that are not going to be perfect, but if I turn this off and on, you see what it's doing to that background. So watch the background before, after.
Mm.
And so you can go in here and you can do all kinds of things where, like, if I visualize depth, it gives you like a what's in focus. So you can make more or less in focus. You can increase the amount of background blur. Like you can go crazy with it, make it look like you shot this with like a 500 millimeter f1, or you can be a bit more tasteful with it. And then of course you can see it's not doing a perfect job on his antler. So then you have to go in and do some masking and that kind of stuff. But you get the idea. This would
Yeah.
be something else to play with. Sometimes when, especially when we're not using lenses that really create a lot of depth, or they're just really far away and you have to zoom in a bit, helping that depth with a little extra background blur is kind of nice too.
Yeah, or you could do double processing and mask it in Photoshop.
Yep. Although I will say, like, you know, I've done that,
Mhm.
but this does a better job than I can do in Photoshop. And that's saying something because I'm pretty decent in Photoshop, but just the way that it masks, because a lot of times if you take this image, you blur it in Photoshop, it's also blurring the moose larger, you know, so you'll
No,
get
I meant just to get that part of the antler back.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you could just mask it in. There's also they have a, how do I do it? It's not
Refine.
allowing me to do, anyways, there's a masking feature here, I think, because this isn't a raw file, it's not allowing me to access it. But right here, you can go in and you can correct the mask that it's created. So you can go in and kind of tweak the mask that it's got, because it's not always perfect. But yeah, you could also dual process it in Photoshop, have one version with this effect and one version without the effect, and just add it where it needs to be. But that would be something to try, especially it's handy in wildlife images for sure. But other than that, like it's very true to life. I think color temperature is perfect. Maybe you could cool it down just the tiniest bit, but I think it's good. Just that little crop helps.
All right.
And then this image here, what I like so much about this is that little bit of blue splash in the background. I think that the processing is really nice. It's got that same, I feel like the sharpening is not overdone in this one, which is nice. It's very similar to that image that we were all raving about. The only thing that I don't like is this little patch here. And so maybe it might be worth trying to go in and clone in some darker foliage in that area.
Oh, the whole blue patch?
Well, no, I like the center blue patch.
No, but you don't like the little blue patch up at the corner.
Right. Yeah.
Right, I get, okay.
That, and
I didn't like this branch coming, you're looking at the branch.
Yep.
Like I tried to dodge it and select it and do everything I could to lighten that.
yeah,
one
it
that
almost
was
looks like it's
diagonal.
photoshopped in or something.
Oh, it's not though, but it's like that black part coming off to the side.
Yeah, let's take a look at it.
You could just burn it down. You could just.
I want to
to
lighten it. It's too dark.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if we opened those shadows, or maybe just,
See, you can see that layer right at the top, that little dodge through the darks.
oh yeah, you did open it up quite
Yeah.
a bit. I'm just curious what if we create
What
a
if
new
you
layer.
What if you just made it all foliage? Like you made it all yellow.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
you just got rid of that V part,
You just take it out.
I'm just,
and then it's just
I
a
want to
wave
see
of
what the
foliage
remove
that
tool
comes in.
does.
Yeah.
Oh,
But just kind of
Remove tool's
looking at the
pretty good.
remove tool. Let's find out. Only one way
Get
to
the
know.
whole darn tree
going
out.
nuts.
It's not bad.
Better
Look at
without
that.
the tree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy.
I mean, it's a little
Yeah.
messy in there with the sticks, but you
Yeah,
could just
but
take
still,
all those.
just
spend a little
A
time.
couple of quick hits with a brush
Yep.
and you get that close.
Yeah. It's the remove tool is really quite something.
It's ridiculous. Yeah.
in a lot of cases, it does a better job than you'd think. Another thing that you could try is like you could go up here, create a new layer, right? And then we can go and make a selection of that color. And you see how it's made this selection of that backgroundy areas, right?
You like
What
we
we'll,
did before?
and then what we'll do is we'll add a little contrast to it so it's white. So we'll go like that. And then we'll apply it as a layer mask to this new layer that we've created. So we've got this layer with this as its layer mask. And now if I go and change the blend mode of this to normal and just clone in some foliage with a clone stamp tool, should only go into that background.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's a good one.
Oh, wow.
What plugin is that over to the right?
TK Actions. So
TK Actions.
it's there's a guy named Tony Kuiper that makes this panel, and it's how I create all of my luminosity masks and stuff. It's really, really useful. It's a huge time saver. You can do all of this stuff like in the channels tab, but it's slow and way more difficult than just like hitting a button and it's just magically created for you. So look at the difference in where the eye goes.
Yeah.
Before, after. That way now all the blue's down here, you know? I think that helps a lot.
Okay, I can go through and do that stuff.
But otherwise, I like the processing on this, and I like the concept behind it with the blue kind of standing out from all the aspen. It's really nice. You know, another little thing that you might think about is if we create a merge visible layer, select the whole image, right? Right click, and then free transform, and then right click again and select warp. You see how these trees are just a little tilted out?
Yeah.
You could just kind of just work with those and just fix that.
Okay.
Like that. Just so they're like straight up and down. It's not a big deal.
No, it is a big deal though.
Sometimes those little things add up, you know? We're trying to make
Would you take
nature
out any of
perfect
the
here.
Oh, would you on the one you were just looking at,
Yeah.
the one with the aspen trees?
Yeah.
Would you take out, see where your cursor is, right? Well, would you go to the right and go
These?
down? Would you take out that, the blue that's back there?
No, I think that feels natural to me.
And
Like,
what
I mean-
about, okay, all right. And then the other question I was going to ask you about this one, see there's a yellow, a really bright yellow patch
Yeah, right
below.
here.
No, down
Oh,
lower,
down. I know what you're talking about in that
This?
below lower
right
end,
there,
right?
right there, to the
to the
right,
right.
right? Up,
In the background.
up, over to the right.
Yeah, yeah, this is what I was looking at here, right?
No, the yellow part.
Right
That-
there.
It's right there.
Yeah, maybe you guys are like a second behind me, but yeah, that's
Oh,
I was looking at
Oh.
that as well. What
Yeah.
is that? Is
It's just the light shining on a tree back there.
Some creature, some woodland fairy.
You would take that out too.
I would be tempted to try to recover it. Just
Okay.
make it to where it's not brighter than this. But
Okay,
I'm guessing like maybe the sun is hitting that and it's not hitting this, so it's just making it way brighter.
yeah,
You'd almost have to start the raw file because that's really bright. But what
Yeah.
you could do again is like if we use TK actions and start with yellows and maybe like you see, as we get more restrictive, it starts making a good selection of that. So this is a lights 1, lights 2, lights 3. Now it's like pretty much just that. And then you can just grab a brightness contrast adjustment layer. And I'm just going to look at that. So bring down the brightness.
Yeah.
If we bring it down
that's
like
better
that.
already.
But the problem is this
I've
is going to
lost-
affect all the other yellows. So
Uh-huh.
we need to put this, we can only put one layer mask on this
In a
this
group.
one layer. So we'll put it inside a group. So put it inside a folder or a group, put a black layer mask on that. And then with a paintbrush, just paint it into where we need it. So here,
All right.
so before, after.
Yeah.
And so
that's
now
better.
when we look at the full frame, not nearly as eye catching.
Yeah. Okay.
You might want to, I would clone some leaves in there or something because it's just
Yeah,
so
because
like
there's no texture. Yeah,
untextured. Yeah.
yeah, I agree. But looking at the images as a whole, Sandy, like there's some really beautiful work, and
This one's
man,
beautiful too.
yeah, yeah. My favorite are probably, well, I like the Waimea Canyon one. Like, there's a lot of potential here. So I think just starting with a slightly less sharp version, you know, and then
Yeah.
start darker, and then add in that dappled light. Like, there's a lot of potential here. It's a good composition. It's great
Uh-huh.
light.
See, one of my weaknesses has been like flatness. So I was trying to go sharp to not sharp, highly contrasted to not contrasted, bright colors to not bright, so in the front and the back,
Yeah.
try to have different transitions.
Mm-hmm.
But then when I look at it, it looks kind of washed out the way I did it. But that was, and then in the one on the Palouse, it was like even though it's monochromatic, it was meant to go dark to light.
Sure. Yeah. And I see
So,
that.
yeah, but yeah, I do think there's an issue with a file. So I'm going to go back and start that one over.
Yeah, just take a look at, like, it probably happened either with the type of sharpening added inside of Lightroom at the very beginning, or when you ran it through Topaz.
Okay.
So, and also, like, I haven't been using Topaz anymore at all anyways, since denoise has been added to Lightroom, because the Lightroom denoise is really good, and it's at the raw stage, you know, so you get a raw file at the end of it, which already makes it better than Topaz. So
I think I got used to using it because I do a lot of wildlife photography, and it was good for birds and stuff.
Yeah,
but
and
maybe not so good for landscape.
Sometimes I'll run it through denoise at the beginning and then Topaz at the end. Like, if there's if I have some crazy image that I shot at like 20,000 ISO or something, I'll run it through 2 passes of denoise, just so I can be more subtle with that first pass.
Okay. Well, I appreciate everybody's suggestions. That's very helpful.
Awesome.
Great stuff.
All right. Well, I think
Really
I'm tired of
enjoyed
hearing
seeing
my own
everybody's
voice.
pictures. They're beautiful.
This has been immensely helpful. I will be doing this again. Hey, I had one follow-up question, Nick, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I did acquire the TK panel here not long ago, and I have done very little with it. Here's my question. Can you recommend a good tutorial series or something? Do you have something? Does somebody have something that can really help you unlock what to do?
So the guy to watch is Sean Bagshaw. So Sean Bagshaw. So he has a YouTube channel with a bunch of free stuff as well.
Yeah, I'm familiar with him. Yeah, for sure.
But he also has like the definitive TK Actions tutorial package. Like he's the TK guy for sure.
Okay, got it.
And he's a good speaker.
He's a good human too.
Yeah, he's
a
great
good
guy.
human.
He's literally a teacher in real life. So, and he's normally teaches science to high schoolers, which means that he's definitely qualified to teach to adults that actually have attention spans.
Well, you're not bad yourself,
Nick. You should plug your boot camp. Nick's doing a boot camp with them.
Yeah. So Sean Bagshaw and I we're teaching a post-processing boot camp. That's what we call it. And it's going to be in Portland in the first week of August. And basically it's 3 days of dedicated Photoshop. And we record every single session. We have breakout groups with where we answer questions and look over shoulders and help. And it's going to be me and Sean Bagshaw, the main presenters. And then we're having a third guy come on to just wander around the room and answer questions and stuff. And It's going to be a
Oh,
good
I
time.
got to look into that. I'd be very interested in that. Yeah.
I haven't launched it or sent out an email about it yet. I've just let my alumni people know. So, but if you go over on my website, you'll find it and you can read all the details.
Okay, I'd love to know. I can maybe email you separately. I'd like to know the dates. If I could fit that in my schedule, I'd be super interested in that.
Cool. Yeah. I did this once with Greg Benz, who he has,
Oh, the Lamenzia guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he and I did one in 2019 and everybody loved it. Like by the end of the week or by the end of the 3 days, everybody's brains are completely fried, including my own. And like my voice is gone. But because we record every session, it's kind of, you can almost think of it as like a live tutorial course filming where you get to influence the content, and you're like, hey, talk about this. And it's kind of cool in that respect because you get all the videos afterwards, but also it's nice to, we'll do like an hour and a half presentation with like a very specific technique that we're focusing on, but there's all the other stuff that, ties into that. And then the question and answer at the end of every session. And then we swap and it works out pretty well. Everybody liked it last time anyway.
Yeah,
Well,
that
it's
sounds
nice
great.
meeting you and really appreciate what you've done for us on your channel. Really glad it's out there and please keep helping us.
I'll try. So the problem with YouTube is I start feeling like I've said everything I have to say. And it's like, how many different ways can I package this?
We can watch you camping. That must be a lot of work to put one of those together.
Yep. It's fun though. Like for me, like as much as I enjoy editing photos, I also enjoy editing video. I just wish that it wasn't me in them. Like if I had some like other person that would go out and film that kind of stuff, I would enjoy it a lot more because like I'm a little bit self-deprecating. I don't know if I come across that way, but like one of the reasons I start doing less talking in my videos is because I'm just so tired of hearing myself ramble. I'm like, dude, just shut up. You're such a know-it-all.
You're a good man, and the photography universe is better for having you around, Nick. So
Oh.
I really appreciate it. I followed you for quite a long time at a distance. So
No, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks for all you've done.
I
Thank you.
appreciate that. So I'm going to stop the recording. And then once this all renders and I get a copy